Allora, guardiamo questo video sui fertilizzanti che è molto importante. Abbiamo trattato già i fertilizzanti in una delle prime puntate e sono molto importanti perché rischiano di mancare. Ovviamente giftiamo degli abbonamenti per i primi sostenitori del canale. Quindi l'abbiamo giftato a BlaBla Kids. Bellissimo il nome, eh? Bene ragazzi, guardiamo questo video interessante sui fertilizzanti del Wall Street Journal.
Fertilizer prices have hit record highs, driven by
Altissimi,
supply shortages caused by the Ukraine-Russia war,
Uno dei motivi per cui crescono anche tutti gli alimenti come inflazione.
along with a host of pre-existing factors.
It's a challenge for all of U.S. agriculture right now. For farmers who are just walking in to buy fertilizer today, they're twice as expensive as they would have been last August, close to 3 times as costly as they would have been in early 2021.
Fertilizer is typically among farmers' biggest expenses each year, and the rising costs are creating cascading impacts for farmer incomes, crop yields, and food prices.
Broadly speaking, that is a big concern for food production. And if other parts of the world can't get their fertilizer in, then it becomes what some CEOs have warned as a global food crisis.
So what's driving these surging
Qual è il problema della crisi globale? Cioè, qual è il problema? È che se arrivasse, che è molto probabile, una crisi alimentare globale, cioè i primi ad avere dei grossi problemi non siamo noi che bene o male qualcosa troveremo, cioè anche come Italia ne parlo, però saranno i paesi più poveri e avranno dei grossi problemi.
fertilizer prices? And what does that mean for farmers and your grocery bills? Like many products and services during the pandemic, fertilizer prices have been impacted by global supply chain challenges.
There's a lot of elements that go into manufacturing fertilizer and how it's produced. It requires different ingredients and natural gas from all different parts of the world. If one of those things is disrupted, it throws off the entire supply chain for how fertilizer is produced.
There are several key factors behind the global fertilizer supply crunch driving high prices. First, various trade restrictions in 2021 led to a steep drop-off in fertilizer exports. In December, the US and European Union imposed sanctions on Belarus. This halted exports of potash, a key ingredient in mineral fertilizers. Belarus
La Russia ovviamente è una dei leader proprio dei fertilizzanti e con queste sanzioni insomma non sarà facile la
is the
situazione.
world's third largest potash provider. Meanwhile, trade restrictions from China, Turkey, Egypt, and Russia led to reduced fertilizer exports in the second half of 2020.
E ovviamente ci ricolleghiamo ai problemi delle esportazioni. Vi ricordate cosa abbiamo detto sull'olio di palma? Perché non mi vengono le parole? L'Indonesia è il primo produttore ed esportatore di olio di palma e dal 28, cioè da domani, ha vietato l'esportazione per calmierare i prezzi interni. Quindi sta succedendo pian piano anche per altri settori, anche in altri paesi del mondo, oltre alla Russia, anche altri paesi.
2021.
China banned phosphate exports in 2021 when a country like China cuts off its exports. That sends prices all over the world up.
In February, economic fallout from Russia's invasion of Ukraine further compounded the strain on fertilizer production. Russia is the world's largest fertilizer exporter, providing around 15% of the world's nitrogen-based fertilizers and 17% of the global potash supply. The West's financial sanctions against Moscow, combined with transportation challenges linked to the war, led to a sharp decline in Russian exports.
If you are going to export out of Russia, the insurance on vessels is very expensive. That keeps people from getting fertilizers out.
At the same time, rising natural gas prices have prompted some European factories to scale back fertilizer production. Natural gas is another major Russian export and a key ingredient in making nitrogen-based fertilizer.
Ovviamente per fare i fertilizzanti serve anche il gas naturale.
Fertilizer is about 3 to 4 times costlier now than in 2020, and farmers around the world are feeling the pinch.
High fertilizer prices has
Guardiamo i
affected
prezzi. Guardiamo un attimo i
Than in
prezzi.
2020, and
Cioè, rispetto al 2020 sono sono aumentati del 50%, però rispetto ad anni prima, guardiamo qualche anno prima, sono raddoppiati.
4 times costlier now
Ecco.
than in 2020, and farmers around the world are feeling the pinch.
High fertilizer prices has affected really the flow of how our operation does business. And really it comes down to timing and how much risk does the retailer take? How much risk does the farmer take?
Grant Wells is a third-generation corn and soybean farmer in Fonda, Iowa. He's also the CEO and owner of Wells Ag Supply, an agriculture retail business.
When the Russian war hit in February is really when things started going wild, is when things started doubling, tripling. And so it's really going to affect what the decision making and what farmers' profitability is going to be in 2020.
E ovviamente gli agricoltori ci perdono tantissimo, perché di fatto a loro produrre costa molto di più, anche la semina, cioè quindi di fatto i prezzi schizzano anche per questo motivo.
Higher fertilizer prices translate into higher production costs for farmers, who already operate on tight profit margins. It's also leading to delays in farmers' planting schedules, which could create supply chain snags as crops are harvested later in the season.
Most farmers I see delaying that decision-making process to later in the season. Instead of maybe November, December, they're probably going to sit on their hands and wait till Jan, Feb, March, hoping for some sort of a price reduction. And if that doesn't happen, then they'll choose to decide, how much can get cut back.
Applying less fertilizer could also lead to lower crop yields. While some U.S. farmers plan to cut back on their overall fertilizer use, others are shifting their acres toward less fertilizer-intensive crops. Soybeans, for instance, don't require as much nitrogen-based fertilizer.
So it's usually a battle in Iowa or in the Midwest between corn and soybeans. And so farmers will look at alternatives to corn. Corn is a lot more dominating on the fertility needs.
According to the U.S. Department of Agriculture,
Ovviamente il mais richiede molto fertilizzante.
the net income for farmers reached around $119 billion in fiscal year 2021. The highest in 8 years. But higher fertilizer prices and other rising costs, such as herbicides, are squeezing their profit margins. That means grocery bills could go up even more in 2022, following a year in which global food prices rose to decade highs.
It appears that food costs are high and farmers are benefiting, but that is not the case. Profit margins are the same. Consumers are just unfortunately having to pay more to put food on their own table.
Higher corn and soybean prices, for example, raise the cost of animal feed for meat companies, which pass along the increase to consumers.
And I think the worst case scenario is that we don't have fertilizer at all to apply to the crops. And
Cioè, c'è anche questo rischio che non avremmo abbastanza fertilizzante proprio,
then that becomes
Quindi non solo il lievitare dei prezzi, che non lo avremo.
a feed and food production issue. If we don't produce the crops, we can't probably produce the livestock and the poultry, and we get into actual food challenges in the U.S., and that would be a much, much greater concern than what we have today.
Meanwhile, some U.S. farmers are looking at commercial fertilizer alternatives. Biologicals, for instance, are natural fertilizers containing microorganisms that enhance soil fertility.
The high prices are forcing us to look at alternative ways to how we've applied fertilizer, to be more precise, and to look at alternatives like what a biological could do.
But switching to biologicals or trying new techniques
Ovviamente non basterà il biologico.
may carry risks for farmers who rely on consistent crop yields to make a profit.
If they try something different one year and their yields are down, crop doesn't come in like they want, then that's it for the year. That is their income. They need it to work. They can't really take the risk.
As fertilizer prices continue to rise, the agriculture industry braces for the long-term impacts on food production.
The solutions are very difficult.
Ovviamente
to
saranno questi problemi, li vedremo, cioè adesso ci sono, ma li vedremo tra un po'. Perché come per l'olio di semi di girasole, che adesso non stanno facendo la semina, quindi i problemi più grossi li vedremo tra qualche mese, anche per questo, per il problema dei fertilizzanti, vedremo tra dei mesi, proprio vedremo il disastro tra dei mesi, ecco.
because it comes down to oil production, natural gas supplies. I think there's a very good chance that fertilizer costs could continue to increase, and we could go into the 2023 crop year with even higher fertilizer costs than what we've had in 2022.
Bene ragazzi, vi è piaciuto? È molto interessante perché magari può sembrare un argomento, come per dire, lontano, no? Cioè da quello che ci riguarda, invece ci tocca da vicino, perché se i coltivatori, se gli allevatori non hanno il fertilizzante, oppure costa davvero troppo, cioè poi alla fine c'è il rischio che non producano neanche, che magari saltino o il raccolto oppure l'allevamento, perché se non ce l'hanno o se è troppo costoso, poi davvero non ci arriva la roba nei supermercati, cioè quindi è qualcosa che diciamo ci tocca proprio da vicino. Di sicuro non moriremo di fame, però insomma potremmo vedere la nostra vita un po' cambiare, magari al supermercato non potremmo trovare tutto quello che vogliamo e magari ci sarà da razionare le cose. Bene ragazzi, io